All right, but what are you doing, retailer, to drive your awareness and to drive my category forward? Like, don't put that full burden on me.
You're listening to the Middleman Podcast with me, Tom Lemongello, and my co-host, Todd Zawicki. Our careers have put us in the middle between retail, media, and brands. But retail media is a closed loop, so we're here to open up the channel and let you listen in. Join our discussions with the people who make retail media happen. All right, we're here for another episode of The Middleman. How are you, Todd?
I'm good, other than that fall is here.
Yeah, is it finally getting cold
Oh,
in
it's
Seattle?
it's 50 degrees and rainy. The monsoon season has started for sure. We're going to get like multiple inches of rain this weekend.
Yeah, my daughter is fighting with us to wear her new winter jacket all the time, even though it's far too warm to to wear exactly the puffiest coat that she has. This week we are talking to Molly Hjelm. She comes from way back in the dunnhumby Mafia, and then she was at DG, their media network. But she's starting something new. She is at Ace Hardware, and she's starting the Red Vest Media Network.
And to me, what's really interesting to talking with Molly is she's launching, right, a retail media network. And I think we're going to see this wave of next gen retailers in terms of like, publishing, say, tier two, tier three. And we're going to see this wave of retail media networks emerge and launch. And I think it's really to anyone who's a listener who's in this space. I think Molly has some practical advice about what does it take from a tech partner standpoint, from a logistics standpoint of how you sell this in, what does this look like? And so I think it's an interesting story given, her background and having been at lots of other interesting places in the retail media landscape to now being someone who's the person launching this effort and rolling out, Red Vest Media. And I think it's funny because you and I were talking about like the stats. If you want to repeat the stats.
Yeah, so Ace has, Molly told us that Ace has 50 million monthly site visitors. They got 70 million loyalty program members and then 6 million app users.
And if you were a publisher, those would be killer stats.
Yeah.
And you would be a good sized publisher. And it's funny in the retail world, you're kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of small. And I hear that as a media publishing guy, I'm like, holy crap, that's really good. And I think that's the other thing is these quote unquote smaller retailers like Ace have national footprints and are getting tens of millions of visitors. And if you are in that bucket, you would be a very large publisher in the online media world. And so there's still heft coming to the market and still some substantial new players coming to the market. And I think that's really fascinating. There's still a lot of growth ahead of us in retail media as things like, again, a national chain like Ace now is launching a retail media network. This is somewhat substantial. I think this is kind of fun and interesting as a result.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting to me is kind of like a nuance to it. But, we just talked to Albertsons, and they are a holding group of companies. They have a whole bunch of like 14, 16 divisions. They're national, but there's all these different names. It's like Acme and Safeway and Shaw's. In the case of Ace, I think the reason that potentially it wasn't launched right away, obviously the grocery guys were always first, but in the hardware space, this is a very large and national brand to your point, but it's a franchise model. And, for me, seeing a franchise model show up in the retail media world, I'm like, well, how's this going to work?
I think that's, it's interesting because as a non-retail guy, I was like, what is franchise? I don't give a, what that means.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like, and, we heard this from Albertsons that they're doing like BOGOs or buy one, get one frees to pair up enterprise marketing with the marketing that's being spent by the vendors, the brands. In the case of a franchise model, you've got to figure out, like how are you going to amass all of these, sort of entrepreneur-owned businesses and make sure that, if you're running retail media, you want to run in-store media. How do you make all of this happen? And so marshaling that spend, coordinating across all of these retail locations. I have an Ace within 2 minutes walking distance from my house. I mean, these are everywhere. And so, that's a lot of complexity. But I think that, it seems like the retail world is ready for this. And somebody like Molly, who's coming in after going to retailer and launching these programs, she knows that, she can take on this new challenge.
I think that it's an interesting story to your point of the logistics of what it takes to grow these retail media networks as they evolve into other types and forms. Right? You mentioned a franchise-based model, and there's restaurants and there's other things we're going to see.
Yeah.
And if you look at smaller businesses and these chains, there's a huge uh, fleet of them, to use that term. And I think if we're going to onboard them, is we again think about in store, right? That's still something you and I care about. Still a landscape that just is going to be ripe for innovation. So much is going to happen there. This world has to get figured out. So I look to today. They're going to start with online and on offsite, but eventually in store and how they loop these in. And they're going to start with like analog things. I think she talks about as an example of maybe as a starting point for them. But I'm really fascinated to see where this goes, and we're going to have to conquer this type of retailer if we're going to conquer in-store to its nth degree for sure. So there's a lot that I think folks can learn from Molly and the Red Vest Media story and what's happening with ACE. So I'm pretty excited about what this means again for the continued growth of the space and to see new players emerge again from national brands you think would already be there, but they're all now showing up and bringing some interesting heft to the retail media space.
Great. Well, let's get into the discussion with Molly. Well, welcome to the Middlemen. Molly, it's great to see you. We were talking just before, and I learned that your storied career in retail media started at dunnhumby, but you were there straight out of college. So tell us about your background. And you've been doing retail media longer than pretty much anybody I know, but you're fairly young. So tell us, how did you get into this?
Yeah, great question. Great place to start this conversation. Thank you guys for having me. I feel so lucky that I had the opportunity to get exposure to what was at the time a very new and novel practice. 15 years ago, Kroger was using their loyalty card data to make more informed decisions at retail. And I was studying marketing at the University of Notre Dame, and they came into our classroom and told us what they were doing, that there was this opportunity out there to be able to give customers what they want through the language of their data, understanding and interpreting their purchase behavior in their data. And so that ability to anticipate customers' needs using data as the source, as opposed to customer research or more qualitative research, I was so enamored of that. And so much so that I moved sight unseen from Minnesota to Cincinnati in order to go and start in this discipline. And I knew even at that time that when you've got a seed of that type of customer information, there's so many places that it could take you as far as data overlays and partnerships. And retail media ended up being one of the coolest applications that I experienced while I was there of that customer data. But I've just followed the thread of that, what has been so exciting and interesting to me. But I followed the thread of that to now.
So what are you doing now?
So I'm at Ace Hardware now, and we've just launched Red Vest Media, our retail media network. We're coming to the scene, 4 or 5 years after some of our leading competitors, 10 years after the dawn of retail media. And at the same
But
time,
that's not late. Like, I want to be clear. Like, you're saying it like, oh no, we're late. Like, it's not. Like, I think we're actually at, sort of, I'd say inning 3 out of 9, right? In terms of what I'd say the evolution of retail media is. So but I think the to your point of getting into Ace and its time, and we're excited about the layer of companies like Ace getting into this space, right? So I think it's actually a great time as we see this space really start to evolve and get everyone in, and so it's great to see Ace launch. So you're launching Red Vest Hardware. By the way, is it required in the hardware space that you have to have a color in the name, like Orange Media, Red Vest
Orange
Media?
apron,
Did
yeah.
you is that like a little checkbox?
Not
Like you've
only
got,
color,
okay, the name must have a
it's a
color. It must have
colored
some reference to
article.
hardware.
It's a
Because this is
colored
Orange
article of
Apron Media,
clothing.
right? We have Red Vest and Orange Apron
Yeah.
Media. Like, is it required to do that?
I
As
love,
you guys
I'll
were going
let
through
the
the naming, was there sort of a rubric that
speculation
you had to
bloom
check?
there, but won't comment on that specifically. I love that you said that. I love that you said, it's not a bad thing at all to be late to the game. And in fact, I'm shouting it from the rooftops because I think there's no better time for a company that has the foundational elements, has the data, which is of course what I have loved from the start, have significant scale. We've got 5,200 stores across the US. We've got 50 million monthly site visits. We've got a huge and growing e-commerce business. For a company that has the fundamentals and like us has a loyalty program, 70 million total lifetime members, this is a great time to get in, because if you've been in retail media for a long time, you've experienced the blood, sweat, and tears that go into those original pioneering media networks, building it out, the baptism by fire of forging relationships across different publisher partners, creating their own measurement, building their in-house data science practices. There's so much that, had not caught up to where we are now, which is that you have so many more tools at your disposal to be able to launch a media network more seamlessly than ever, giving the best outcome to vendors and making it a lot more seamless for a retailer.
Well, there's I think maybe a reason why Ace didn't come online immediately was that you have a different model. You have a franchise model, basically, right? And so, this McDonald's like franchise structure that we talked about in our preparations with you. Tell us what that means when you're trying to launch a retail media network.
Yeah, it's a good question. And most people aren't aware of this, but ACE is a co op. So we have almost 5,200 stores across the US, across all 50 states, and they're independently owned. And a lot of these folks have had these businesses in their families for generations. We give those retailers, those independent store owners have so much autonomy, a surprising amount of autonomy. And in that world, we are not as similar to a McDonald's like franchise. We allow our store owners essentially to have full control over assortment decisions. So they might have very unique and localized assortment specific to their neighborhoods and their communities. They can decide what marketing elements they want to opt into from headquarters. And so we really at headquarters provide the utility of wholesale purchasing power for our ACE retailers and marketing that drive, and the branding of ACE that drives people into the stores. But outside of that, they really are running their businesses the way they see fit.
Yeah, that assortment part is really hits home for me as somebody who is, from New York and, I like to walk to the hardware store. It's kind of like the convenience model almost in the hardware world where it's like I discover products there. It's fast. I'm buying one thing at a time. It's very different from the Home Depot shop or, let's say the Lowe's shop. And it really for consumers, it's not really for small businesses. So there's a lot of differences there, but certainly there can be some advantages, I think.
Definitely some advantages. And, there's complexity too, because it's not, pushed down from headquarters and everybody adopts things, whether that's assortment decisions, pricing, you name it. But in our case, I like to look at it as just we've got so many testing, a microcosm of testing that's happening across our environment. We've got retailers that have screens in their stores where they're messaging to their customers, or they're experimenting with in-store audio. And so what this creates is all these different data points that we can look at and see what's working for our best, most performant retailers, and think about how that could be applied within retail media space. So as far as evaluating a portfolio expansion for retail media, it actually presents some really interesting opportunities there as well.
When you think about the retail media network, and you talked about 70 million profiles, 50 million monthly visitors to the website, one of the interesting factors is, as a media guy, as a publisher, if you went to the old ComScore top 100 list and you had 50 million monthly uniques, that would put you in the top 100. Mm-hmm. So I think what's fascinating is in the retail world, Ace is like, oh, we're like this little thing. We get 50 million people a month. Whereas from a publishing world, and I think this speaks to why the rise of RMNs is really fascinating, is you're a top 100 equivalent publisher. And if you're a top 100 equivalent publisher, you're a big boy. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of one of the interesting factors here is, we've thought retail media has been this 85% Walmart and Amazon 15% for everyone else. And I go, yeah, but that's not because it's truly 15%. That's just because they're getting started on that end of the scale. If you look at Amazon's market share, it's like 5%, Walmart's like 5%. And the scale of what retailers like yourself bring is, I think, so much bigger. And I think it's like you've all been so, some ways, beaten down by the competition. Whereas from a media standpoint, you have way more scale than I think people realize. And from a publishing world, when you say 50 million monthly uniques, that's a heck of a big business.
Yeah.
And and so I think this is where it gets exciting in terms of the, like, where's retail media going? And the next step is we're onboarding the equivalent of top 100 publishers now to this world and this landscape. And I think that's really fascinating in terms of like the growth I expect to see out of that quote unquote tail. It's not really a tail, um, of the retail media sector, is where I think there's a lot of opportunity, and the scale that you're bringing isn't small. It's actually really meaningful.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because I believe in retail media not because of, it's the buzzword of retail media, but because of the value that it will bring to ACE's endemic community of vendors, but also to your point on the size and scale of the properties, the ability for non-endemics and to benefit from this ecosystem is absolutely there as well. Because this is not just retail media, it's media and it's marketing that's going to connect with this unique set of customers, these DIY customers that are in a immediate consumption type need state where they need something now and they don't want to drive far away to get it. They want to leave their doorstep and walk 5 minutes, which is my experience. But we are within 15 miles of 75% of Americans. There's true value in the scale and the reach that we can provide.
Very on brand with the true value. So I think that I think that though that well, I think that what's interesting though is tracing your career back to Dollar General, because that was a retailer that I worked with a lot, and the value proposition there was getting to local environments that were very non-DMA. They were very hard. They were rural, basically.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I feel like are those the learnings that you're taking to this model with Ace? But with Ace, you have a situation where you have a much larger and more frequent loyalty base than you did there. And so, I mean, obviously, there can be arguments about how you deal with that data. There's a lot of cash transactions, credit card transactions, maybe without loyalty at DG. But going to Ace, if you have, I mean, Ace is like big on like Apple Pay and stuff. So it's a little more tech forward, and it's a little more you have more to work with. So like, what are you sort of bringing to this? And I'd love to hear about that. I also love to hear about how do you bring in these brands who potentially, maybe not Stanley and DeWalt, but other ones that maybe don't have a retail media buying practice. Like, how do you get them involved?
Yep. Well, I'll start where you started. I was thrilled to come over to ACE and have the full breadth at my fingertips of a huge scaled e-commerce business. The 5,200 stores definitely mirrors that ecosystem I had come from, where you've got full national reach, and that geographical footprint and kind of being on every corner is a really important function that retail media plays, because it plays that different role versus pure play e-commerce retail, where people who want to go in and touch and feel a product, or they need it right then in the next hour, they can get their hands on it through us, either as a fulfillment model or as a store. And so I did come here feeling like, wow, I've got a bigger breadth of portfolio elements to work with here that are going to be highly valuable to this vendor community. Whereas in the prior role I was in, it was all about providing incrementality and increased audiences in rural areas that couldn't be reached any other way. Here, it's both. We have giant scaled offsite audiences that will be meaningful and valuable for people trying to reach a DIY consumer audience. And we've got these highly valuable publisher-like properties with our 6 million app users and 50 million monthly site visits. So for me, it meant this opportunity to stand up all at once in these 6 months that I've been here and we've been working to launch this. What is the equivalent of a mature portfolio with off-site, in-store, and on-site media tactics? That's so valuable for our vendor community, big and small vendors, because it just gives them more options to intercept people at different areas of the purchase fund and consideration funnel. To respond to your
What do you
second,
go? No, no. I was going to just touch on the in store piece of that, right? Because I think that's an area that Tom and I have been talking a lot about recently. In a recent conversation, like Sarah Marzano, the marketer, brought this up in terms of we've been talking a lot about in store, and it's interesting because one of the things I was going to wonder about, given the 5200 and the co-op model, how do you think about in store? Is that something you're really hoping to build into your model and offering? And it's both Tom and I are very excited about that opportunity because the ability to reach 70 million people, 75% of the US population in store. I think one of the fascinating things about in store is the amount of time spent is significant, hasn't gone down with the rise of e-commerce. E-commerce is just added to retail, it hasn't replaced in store. And
As a
we've had a number of
non-sophisticated
conversations.
buyer of hardware, I spend an incredibly long time in the store. So,
Well, it's this is and that's a unique environment for retailers, right?
yeah.
It absolutely differentiates them in terms of other media and the ability, as you said, to be on-site, off-site, in-store with media programs across a large footprint of the United States. I was curious to sort of hear of how much of a focus will in-store be for Red Vest, and how do you think about it? How do you see it sort of playing out? Because we've been talking about it for a very long time,
mm-hmm.
but we haven't necessarily seen a huge, large footprint in store in most retail media programs. And so it's been one of these things where you look at time spent by the average consumer. We use that old rubric in terms of we've talked a lot recently about the monetized time spent in store is really low. And we used to say that about digital in terms of on site back in the day. And today it's fully monetized. And so it seems like it's a huge opportunity for retailers to monetize that in store traffic in a way that it's not. And I think that to us is a big unlock for the next 5 to 10 years around retail media. So I'm curious your perspective on in store and how is it going to fit into your retail media strategy?
Yeah, I agree with you that it's incredibly important, and it was incredibly important to me at launch that we had something that we could launch with that would allow kind of the cohesion of the campaign that we're executing
Yep.
offsite or onsite to come through to the customer and have that ability right at the point of decision to be able to continue that messaging and that influence. We're starting with printed signage, and that it seems so basic, everything old is new again, but at the same time,
You
there's
can
so,
measure printed signage. That's fine.
yeah, it's tried and true. It gives you that opportunity to create digital in-store engagement through QR codes and
Yep.
things like that, and it gives you that ability to not lose them at that final moment. And I think there's like when we talk so much about media and we think so much about e-commerce, and there is just that the limitations of media are that you can drive someone into the store, and if they come to the store and they don't feel, if they're not helped in the right way, if they can't find what they're looking for, if they get there and they're influenced by a different price point or a different marketing message, then you've lost them through no fault of the marketing. And so I'm reassured here that we've got such a large footprint, so we're convenient, that we've got an incredibly trained red vested, we call them our red vested heroes in our stores, who are they are trained to be helpful. They're trained to take you by the arm and take you to the aisle where you're going to be able to get the product that you need. And so we've got that experience here of like a toolkit for our vendors for them to invest in to engage customers, and then they can trust that when they get to the store, they're going to be stewarded to the product that they're looking for. And when they get there, if they can have an in-store sign component that helps further elucidate what's going on with that brand, then that's all you can ask for. But I
I
see,
love the fact that you brought up this analog, right? The printed, because I think a lot of people have gotten stuck in retail media land that if it's not digital, it's not
yeah,
retail media. And right, you're sort of waving the flag very interestingly, like guys, as I can get you in store, it's fine, it's analog, fine, it's printed, but it's still a component of the campaign at a significant scale. And because I think that's been like Kroger launching um, their in store with 2 test stores, and Best Buy relaunching their in store around a handful. And so the question from Sarah Manzano, an e-marketer, was, when we talked to her, is like, how are we going to get from 2 stores to hundreds of thousands of stores in anything less than 20 years? Like, people, how do we do better and make this faster? And I like the fact that you're sort of raising, like, well, why not
We can
do
test it
analog?
now.
I mean,
Yeah.
it counts, right?
Well,
It's
I
like
think,
it's interesting to think of, we could still do this and try to deliver. Again, it's a great first step, and I think very practical. And so I like your point of view here in terms of, why let it be a limitation? Let's just embrace the parameters that we have, the constraints, and still build a program. And then it can, as there's revenue and means to justify, you can transition to screens and so forth. But
well,
I think it's a great idea.
so in this world, so I don't know the hardware space as well, and so I'm interested in actually, how far did trade get? Was it as similar to, say, a grocery where they had blades everywhere and stickers on the floor and all of that, or is trade less penetrated? Because the reason I would ask is that the reason you're not seeing that in-store digital screen happening overnight is because not only just the cost of the installation, it's the fact that the budget's already there for the trade, and we have all this stuff, and maybe it's good enough.
Rain on my parade, Tom, by being practical.
Oh, sorry.
You know,
But no, actually, excellent point, Tom, in terms of,
Yeah, we're here to
trade, Todd, is
learn.
actually stolen. No, it's a great point. Like, traditionally, trade has owned that
Yeah,
printed sign versus retail media being part of it. And that trade versus retail media dynamic is one that we see or hear and talk a lot about. So it's a fair point, Tom.
yeah. I don't know for sure. We're so early on that I don't know what to expect there. But as far as what it looks like at ACE, we have not monetized signage, not through co-sale partners, not
So
through
it's a green
partner
field.
partners. So it's like the first obvious, most helpful step that we could make
that's great.
available to partners. We produce our signage today and we send it to our opted-in stores. And so making that inventory available and being willing to put our creative resources behind vendors that want to be in our store with our with our oversight and with our voice just made too much sense. So it's a little
Yeah,
unique to us. But to answer Todd's earlier question, like, I think there's so much potential for in-store to make it, to take beyond this first step, to evaluate audio and screens. And uniquely here at ACE, while everybody else is having that conversation about the CapEx, OpEx expense, of course, we'll have to have some level of that conversation as well. I mentioned earlier, but we've got all of these independent store owners that have made the investment in one screen, in their store, or have decided that they want to have, audio playing programmatically in their stores. And so we actually have a really large footprint of screens and in-store audio that we could kind of start to lean into and make available with the right messaging with our retailers.
that's great. So I wanted to get back to the earlier question
Yeah.
about how are you getting people? I asked two questions at once. That wasn't fair. But how do you get back to, there's obviously the experienced retail media brands where maybe they're already investing in Lowe's and Home Depot and other places. And Ace is a great addition because maybe you get different geographies and things like that. So maybe it's an easier sell. I don't know. Then the traditional ACE vendors, where maybe they're smaller, they've never bought media before. Are they even in a JVP? Do they need to be educated about that? Like, how do you look at those? Because you run sales for Ace Red Vest, right?
Yeah, I lead the network. Yep. I
So,
just hired a head of sales. Yep.
okay. So, yeah, for putting on your selling hat, how do you approach those two as Ace? And like, do you just focus on the first one for now, or is it a fast follow on the smaller
Well,
brands?
and maybe let me follow up a more practical way, Tom,
Yeah.
of where you're going, which is, like, so obviously large brands or enterprise sales from a media standpoint, and
Mm-hmm.
smaller brands traditionally have ended up, like you see, whether it's Amazon or Walmart Connect or other platforms, sort of a self-serve model.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that's where you're going, which is, are you looking for this to be a more enterprise sales model? Or is it open to the world and everyone can log in and start buying retail media, sponsored search, or whatever it has through a self-serve portal?
Yep.
Right? As a more practical, as the media guy who's built platforms like that, that's kind of, I think, where you're,
Why
in
we're
terms of how do
reviewing.
You
you,
have the playbook. Yes. So the beauty of this, and especially the beauty of this at ACE, is that all of our vendors have the opportunity to participate in it. And that's important for us in particular because we, with our marketing, our enterprise marketing efforts, we put a lot of assets, media, and marketing behind kind of our top 12 best brands, we call them. So there are these big names, Stanley Black and
Yeah.
Decker, Weber, that you know to associate with ACE. We have some level of exclusivity with those partners.
Yeah.
And so in marketing them, so goes ACE's opportunity. Um, and what that has meant is that we've got a lot of vendors at ACE who have lacked the ability to connect with an ACE customer, to share their message in a big way, and then measure the impact and optimize, through the path of their own choosing. And so I have been talking about this internally and externally with our partners about just the breath of fresh air it is to have a toolkit available to you that's both incredibly precise and comprehensively measurable in a way that we haven't had available within our ecosystem, that allow you to have more control than ever before into kind of growth levers and putting tailwinds behind your business. And that's what it continues, like going back to the very beginning of my career, that's what continues to excite me, is that you can identify a pain point. You're losing customers, or you want to, you're not seeing the trial that you wanted on your innovation. Now we can take that data and reach those customers and drive the behaviors we seek, share back with the merch team. Here's what we did. Here's what we invested. Here's what it garnered for us. And then be able to optimize in the future. And so that toolkit, making that available to this vendor community, which has, as Tom was mentioning, varying levels of familiarity with this toolkit to begin with, is what's so exciting to me, and what builds my passion for this.
Who are the partners or vendors that are powering your underlying platform, in terms of who you selected, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of the what and why of why you selected who you did? That's what your peers are wondering this too, because we were just talking to someone the other day, and he was like, Todd, please help me. I'm getting like 10,000 inbounds for all these tech platforms, and I don't know if there's anything new or interesting I should be paying attention to. So your peers are very much interested in terms of who you picked to power your platform, why you selected who you selected, because they're going through, as they think about those same decisions, and thinking of, do they replatform, do they look at new partners? And so this is a sort of a very top of mind talking point amongst your peer set.
It is. It's been interesting since I've come into this role, and since I've talked publicly about our partner behind our tech stack, which is Epsilon Retail Media. I've gotten a lot of inquiry from C-suite elsewhere asking, like, what went into that decision, and is that the right
Yeah.
decision for us as well? And my answer to that is that this was the right decision for ACE. So we launched with Epsilon. It made all the sense in the world to have this one sophisticated partner powering our IT resolution, our tech stack. They had amazing interoperability with publishers. They have this MRC accredited standardized measurement. All of these things to be able to take the best of ACE, our data, our loyalty information, our sales data, and be able to put it into something that is sophisticated, that works, that will benefit right away from best in class, made sense for the environment that I came into when I came here. And yet, as I've talked, like, this is a very ecosystem dependent decision, because if
Yep.
you're at DG, you're going to, for example, when I was there, we had a different tech stack for reasons of where we had invested internally, the level of sophistication of certain areas of the org that were already stood up, how we were using our data at that time. And so the conversations I'm having with folks are really get to know the landscape of your data, the structure of your IT and data science teams, the state of your CDP, and then what matters most to the vendors that are in your community. What's gonna matter to them as you make that decision. And just because I've made this decision and it's absolutely the right decision for this ecosystem doesn't mean it's going to be the same elsewhere.
Well, I think that's fair. I mean, what's interesting, how much of, because Epsilon's a full service tech and service solution, And we've definitely seen them win other business as well, especially I think in your tier of quote unquote size. Um, and how much of the service offering was important for you in terms of starting out, in addition to the product and tech stack? Because I think that's something people think of. You know, Tom, to your point, competed as Quotient against Epsilon.
Mhm.
And that model kind of went out of favor a little bit, I think, in 4 or 5 years ago. But I think it's kind of coming back, and
Yeah, you've had
Epsilon's doing well. So I think your perspective is good here.
different waves of in-housing seem to happen, but it's like waves on the beach. They go in and out, and
Yeah, it's like it's a pendulum. And I
yeah,
think there was an initial move away from that quotient model, and there was some, but when you move away from it, you learn from it, and those pain points can be addressed. I was just having a conversation with a CMO yesterday about this same dynamic of why would you launch with kind of full stack with another partner given some of the hurdles and pain points others have experienced. And my learnings here are you, the retailer, need to have full ownership and engagement with your vendor community. These are your long term partnerships. There's nobody in it with your vendor partners like you are as the retailer, because your sales opportunity and your ability to grow them together are mutually tied. The rising tide lifts all ships. No third party is going to be able to engage them in the right way over time, or expect that kind of decades long relationship that you have there. So it was important to me as a learning from some of those other models that we have our own in-house partnerships and sales teams that is accountable for the strategy, the penetration, the engagement of our vendor community. From there, that we are not, that our partners are not relying on a retailer's talent to buy the media on their behalf, measure the media, where there's that dynamic of grading
Right.
your own homework. So to me it feels like an evolution of those past models solving for some of the pain points there.
No, I think that's really fascinating, and a good perspective in how you're kind of dividing the line between what you want in-house, like we need to own this,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's the media piece, which maybe is a little less core in terms of operating it and so forth. And someone like Epsilon can really help out in terms of their expertise and product perspective. And so it's good that I always like when people have a firm opinion of what they want and how they want to structure their business and operations. And hearing that from you of like you've got a firm idea of how you're thinking of building out the practice of retail media within ACE, and I think that's a really interesting sort of a line between the two. And it's fascinating to see just kind of the re-rise of Epsilon, because I think everybody kind of forgot about Epsilon for a number of years, and they've won a number of accounts I think over the last couple of years. There's a whole a crew of ex-Quotient people, part of the Quotient Mafia,
oh yeah.
that seems to thrive across retail media, and Tom is a part of that. And it's fun as Tom's pulled. That's actually what helped start our podcast was
Absolutely.
Tom saying, let's go talk to all my old buddies
So
You're
easy.
from the
everywhere.
space. So
I actually have one more question for you before we go, because I'm starting to see it's actually good that we did this after grocery shop, because I was able to read the news about Albertsons doing a BOGO, or a buy one get one, from their enterprise marketing. So you buy some retail media, that Albertsons will sort of do a match for you.
Mhm.
Now that you're at Ace, you talked about the fact that the stores have their own liberty to have their own assortment, but there must be a role of the enterprise to be able to provide them. You were already starting to talk about it. They're providing the signage, so
Mhm.
they're making that instead of going to a Vestcom or somebody else like a Neptune. What else is there from the enterprise perspective that Ace brings in this franchise model that might be unique or interesting for the listeners to hear about?
Yeah, we do a lot as an enterprise marketing team to support brands specifically. And most of that is surrounding our best brands and our categories that we want to be famous for, like power and barbecue and paint. Um, but that has been a new dynamic for me that I think is great for a vendor community to hear, because any vendor that is going to engage in retail media has a burning question in the back of their mind, which is, all right, but what are you doing, retailer, to drive your awareness and to drive my category forward? Like, don't put that full burden on me. And we have some of the best and brightest at Ace doing that with a 40-person in-house creative team, and really sitting there
That's
putting
huge. 40 people is a lot.
huge is what
Wow.
I know, but wonderfully so, because we're doing, we're really heavily invested.
No, it's great. That's an asset. Like I'm
Yeah.
like, that's great.
No.
We like when
The
people are leaning in. So that's good.
absolutely.
Yeah. And so putting TV ads out there and putting, really ensuring that our integrated aligned promotions are front and center with our customer across all the ways that we have to engage them, is something that's so refreshing as I'm coming into this environment versus other places I've been, because I can look partners in the eye and confidently tell them, like, we've got you. We're investing incredibly heavily in Google search and in TV. Like, we are driving the foot traffic. We are promoting your category. And with the launch of RedVest, now you have a toolkit at your disposal to be able to drive control of the specific message at the specific time, featuring your specific brands, and measure and optimize. And so to have both really does feel like the best of both worlds.
What I heard there that's really interesting is that Ace is taking the lead on the TV, because I think it has been challenging, and you correct me if I'm wrong, to get the advertisers to invest in TV because of the way retail media is normally measured. So that's an interesting one for me. Now, I said that was the last question, but we didn't ask you about the future of retail media. So what are your thoughts? You've been in this for a while, so you've seen it in a lot of different iterations. Where do you see it going?
I think this moment, we kind of started here, and it's good to come back to this at the end of this conversation. I think this is an incredibly exciting moment for retail media, because there was this dawn of it, there was this scale of it. And now there's a maturation point where the tech stack around it, the partnerships around it, the just collective intelligence around it, and the ideation of where it can go is all getting to a point where we can plug in with a partner like this and be able to launch a mature portfolio in 5 months, which is nuts. So I think the speed of, the sophistication of, and the beauty of national marketers kicking the tires of retail media over the last, at least 3 years is helping us mature, get better, create more precise and more precisely measurable media out there. And then the dawn, of course, I mean, we can't talk about the future without talking about AI, but what I love that large language models and that AI put behind retail media can help bring the promise of retail media to life. It's always, for me, it's always been about the data and the data signals and what customers are telling us, and the ability to optimize a campaign on hundreds of variables in real time thanks to AI, which is something that we'll be able to provide to our partners from day one.
Yeah. Getting back to me being vulnerable about my, inability to shop for hardware, it's because, it's very hard to do that with keywords.
Yeah.
It's really, this is a specific project I'm trying to work on. That context needs to be much bigger. So I'm happy to hear that you guys are thinking about that. But thanks for thinking of coming on the middleman. I know you have, you're busy launching a retail media network, so we really appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This is great. And, I'm learning a lot from you guys too. So thanks for having me.
All right. See you next time.
Yeah.